Hey there, 7th grade guys and gals. We're going to go ahead and start our next lesson for the week. So we did the American Revolution on Thursday last week, the last time we were together. Today we're going to do the French Revolution. And fun fact and surprise for you, it'll be the last formal notes lesson we have. So on Thursday we're going to do something a little bit different as we finish our year together. We'll still have work, I'll still have work for you, but the French Revolution will be where we end our formal lesson studies and notes. So you can get excited for that. Again, Thursday will be a little different. To finish out our last bit of class together, we're just going to compare and contrast the French Revolution and the American Revolution. You're going to do a type of mini project with that, which we'll talk about on Thursday. But today we have this notes video for the French Revolution. Make sure you have your notes, something to write with, something to write on. You're going to want to follow along as we talk about the French Revolution. Make sure you still have your American Revolution notes. Follow along with the French Revolution video today. Take the notes as we go. Again, something to write with, something to write on. Let's dive in. Our guiding questions for the day. Why did revolution break out in France, and what was the aftermath of the revolution? So we're talking about France, we're talking about why there was what we call the French Revolution, and we're talking about after the revolution, what happened? What did France look like? What happened to Europe? How did Europe grow, change, develop? We're talking about why did the revolution happen? What happened after the revolution? What were the effects? What was the cause? What was the effects? That's what we're looking at and diving into today. And these questions that you'll see and be able to answer by the end of this video lesson. So France, our old friend, our good buddy. We've talked about France when we talked about the Enlightenment. We talked about how they had a lot of philosophers that were into the Enlightenment ideals with freedom and different writings. And some of those things will come up today as we're talking about the French Revolution and why the French people acted the way they did to their leaders, why they responded, and why they wanted certain changes in their government. So you'll see a lot of those common themes from our recent Enlightenment unit. They'll pop up and come up again. First thing I want you to write down, and again, make sure you're taking the notes and following along as we go today. So the first thing to write down, the French Revolution was based on the same ideas as the American Revolution. The French people wanted political change based on the ideas of freedom and equality. It's up there for you to write down, and I'll read it again. The French Revolution was based on the same ideas as the American Revolution. The French people wanted political change based on the ideas of freedom and equality. So when you think of the American Revolution, how America started, America got its origins and beginnings, that was a beginning of a country. France was already a country and a place, but the reasons they revolted, the reasons they acted the way that they did, were very similar to the reasons that the American people revolted against Britain. There was a lot of similarities in reason, a lot of similarities in purpose, some differences obviously, but they had a number of things in common. And you can think back to our American Revolution lesson on Thursday when we talked about taxation without representation, biased leadership that was kind of uninvolved and disconnected from the people. These are all problems that early American colonists had, and French people had these as well. French citizens and civilians at the time had this problem with their government leaders. They felt this disconnect. They felt this unfair taxation. So there was a lot of similarities and roots that sparked and started the American Revolution and the French Revolution. So we're going to go into talking specifically about the French Revolution now, why it started and what it was and the different aspects of it. So you can write down your notes. Before the Revolution, French kings ruled with absolute power, and French society was divided into three social classes called estates. I'll read that again for you. It's up there for you to write down. Before the Revolution, French kings ruled with absolute power, and French society was divided into three social classes called estates. So we've got kings in France, absolute power. They could do whatever they want. They had ultimate, unlimited authority, whatever they want, however they wanted, absolute power, without question. And society was divided into these three social classes. They're called estates in France, three estates. First estate, second estate, third estate. When we talk about estates, we're talking about real estate or place or property. But these are what they called their social classes in France, these things called estates. And there were these three estates in France. So the first one was the clergy. That was anybody to do with mostly the Catholic Church. Catholicism was a big thing in France. So clergy, people related, working for the church, that's called the first estate. That was the highest and respected one. Second's the nobility, people in power like kings, nobles, people that own a lot of land. That's the nobility. That's the second estate, pretty powerful. Third estate is everyone else, artisans, merchants, peasants, everybody else that's not nobility, not working for the church, or not working for the church, they're not a clergy, they're not nobility, they don't necessarily own land, they don't have peasants working for them, they're not king or queen or part of royalty. That's everyone else. That's the third estate, the rest of the class of the people in France. And you can write down your notes that the people in the third estate made up 98% of the French population and were the poorest but also paid the most taxes. The third estate got no voice or representation in government affairs. I'll read that again for you, and it's there for you to write down. The people in the third estate made up to, sorry, it should be, I'm sorry, yeah, I had it right. Sorry, had a lost my words there for a sec. The people in the third estate made up 98% of the French population and were the poorest, but also pay the most taxes. The third estate got no voice or representation in government affairs. So they're most of the population. They're 98% of France's population at this time. They're called the third estate. Peasants, merchants, artisans. They pay the most taxes, but they're also pretty poor. They really don't have much to them. And they got no voice or representation in government affairs. They had no power, no say. They just followed along. So they were similar to the American colonists deal, them being upset because they also got no taxation without representation. Just like the colonists we talked about on Thursday with the American Revolution, the people in France at this time, the third estate, were just getting taxed and taxed and taxed, and they had no say, no vote, no really rights in their government system. And of course, problems were getting worse in France. Not only were they very poor and most of the population without a voice or representation, and they were getting taxed heavily, but there was more problems in brewing in France. And you can write down your notes. In 1788, France was short on food and almost bankrupt. I'll read that again for you, and you can write it down. In 1788, France was short on food and almost bankrupt. So they have a food shortage, supplies and resources are running low. Also almost bankrupt. They got themselves involved in wars against Britain. We talked about the one before the American Revolution when France owned part of the colonies and part of early America. Then they also helped out the colonists in the American Revolution, but that almost ran France bankrupt. They spent a lot of money on war. They spent a lot of it on fine things for the royalty, which wasn't much of the population. So they're low on food, low on money. Things aren't looking good. They're running low on resources. And to the 98% of the population in the third estate, the peasants, the merchants, and everybody else, this was unacceptable. They had been taxed and taxed and taxed and taxed and taxed and lost so much money, yet somehow France was still almost bankrupt and short on food. And they weren't having it. They're saying, if we're losing all this money, why isn't there food? Why doesn't the country have money? This is unacceptable, and we're going to change this. That's when things started to change rapidly in France. So you can write down in 1789, the Third Estate met separately as the National Assembly. So they met as their own government, and they ended the privileges of the clergy and the nobles, changing France into a constitutional monarchy with an elected legislator in 1791. I'll read that again for you, and it's up there for you to write down. In 1789, the Third Estate met separately as the National Assembly and ended the privileges of the clergy and the nobles, changing France into a constitutional monarchy with an elected legislature in 1791. So 1789, they meet as their own political group because they're not allowed in normal politics. So the Third Estate meets as their own National Assembly, and they end the privileges. They say, you know what? We're most of the population, so the clergy and the nobles, they ain't got nothing anymore. They ain't got no privilege. And they changed France into a constitutional monarchy, which means there's still a king, but he's under law of a constitution now. He has to follow a certain set of rules, a certain set of laws. He has to follow them. And so they also decided they're going to start to get elected legislation. They're going to get to be a part of the government, and they really pushed that issue in 1791. And you got to remember that really the nobles and clergy couldn't do anything about this. This was 98% of France's population that was standing up and going rough and hard this time. So they're standing up, they're going to go against the nobility, and they're going to go against the clergy, and they're going to fight back. They're going to fight rough, they're going to play hardball. They're going to go against the nobility and the clergy, 98% of the population. And again, similar to the Americans, they draft up a constitution, rules and laws to govern themselves by. There's a little bit of a difference, though. America, the American Revolution, the Constitution was after the Revolution, after they won, where France, they drafted because they're ready to fight. They draft up this Constitution and they set up these rules because they're ready for a fight. They're ready for a battle. They're ready to make some change. They're most of the population and they're going to get the job done here and they're going to get it done right. So you can write down your notes. In 1792, another new government was set up. So in 1792, a new government was set up in France called the National Convention, which ended the monarchy, made France a republic, and created a new constitution that gave the vote to every man. I'll read that again for you, and it's up there for you to write down. In 1792, a new government was set up in France called the National Convention, which ended the monarchy, made France a republic, and created a new constitution that gave the vote to every man. 1792, they get rid of the monarchy completely. They start something called the National Convention. So the monarchy's gone. No more king anymore. No more king, no more queen. They make France a republic, similar to parts of maybe ancient Greece or Rome. They're having a government for the people and by the people with their choice. They're making it a republic, and they make a brand new constitution. They're giving the vote, giving political rights, political voice, right to vote. They're giving the vote to every man. They're giving them that freedom and that fair share in the government. Little problem, though. No more monarchy in the government, but there's still a king. He's still alive, still well, and the king at the time tries to flee. He tries to run away and hide, but he gets caught, and they decide, you know what? He's still around. We don't want him. We're going to kill him. So in 1792, you can write down your notes. In 1792, the National Convention found King Louis XVI, that's just the number of the king he was on the line, guilty of aiding France's enemies and had him beheaded by guillotine. So again, I'll read it for you. It's there to write down. In 1792, the National Convention found King Louis XVI guilty of aiding France's enemies and had him beheaded by guillotine. So they take the king, they kick the monarchy out and start what they're calling a free government. They want it to be free for the people, and they take the king, and not only is he out of a job now, but they're going to kill him. They find him guilty. They say, you know what, you've helped out France's enemies. You're guilty. You're a criminal, and we're going to behead you. We're going to chop off your head. We're going to use something called the guillotine. Now, you probably knew what a guillotine was before. You've probably seen it in a movie. You've probably seen it in other different things. I think there's one in like the Minions movie with the Despicable Me franchise. I'm sure there's one in the movie Mr. Peabody and Sherman. But the guillotine's that thing with the rope. They chop the rope, the blade comes down and chops off your head. You lay somebody's neck in that little circle there at the bottom. They lay it, it chops off their head. This was a new thing around this time when the French Revolution was happening, so it became very popular. It was supposed to be a more human way, supposedly, to kill people because it was quick and instant. You could debate that, but it was called and is called the guillotine, and it was a big and popular way to kill people in that time. And people started to become very suspicious of one another because the French Revolution's now in high gear. The king's dead. Not only was he kicked out, but he's dead. And now people want to change the government. But people start to get suspicious and a little bit anxious with one another. They're not sure whether they really trust one another. Is this person really going to have my best interest in mind? We're a free government, but are they going to look out for me? Am I going to look out for them? They start to get suspicious and on edge, and things are getting a little bad and heated again in France because they're trying to figure out this new government, but they don't really know what to do. So, you can write down your notes. The National Convention created a committee of public safety to oppose enemies of the revolution, which led to the Reign of Terror. I'll read it again. You can write it down in your notes. The National Convention created a committee of public safety to oppose enemies of the revolution, which led to the Reign of Terror. National Convention, the government of France at the time decided they're going to create this committee, call it the Committee of Public Safety. And you know what? Its job is kind of like security for France. They're going to look out for enemies of the revolution. They're going to prevent anybody from stopping the revolution, anybody from overthrowing the new government. Kind of like a police force in a way. They're going to oppose enemies of the revolution. They're going to watch out for France and France's new government. Problem is, though, it doesn't go so well. It leads to a little something called the Reign of Terror. What's the Reign of Terror, you ask? Well, this is the Reign of Terror, and I want you to write it down in your notes. The Reign of Terror, you can define it as from July 1793 to July 1794, when about 40,000 people were killed by guillotine because they were believed to be disloyal to the revolution. I'll read it again for you and you can write it down. Reign of Terror, the Reign of Terror, you can define it as from July 1793 to July 1794, when about 40,000 people were killed by guillotine because they were believed to be disloyal to the revolution. So all the suspicion is going around, all these things are happening, and it's this whole year from July to July 1793 to 1794 when about 40,000 French people were killed because things were suspicious. They were believed to be disloyal to the revolution, so they start taking them to the guillotine and chopping heads, chopping heads, chopping heads, and chopping heads. So just like the king, many people died because there was a lot of suspicion. There was a lot of chaos. Who's for the revolution? Who's got the country's best interest in mind? Who's going to look out for the rights of other people? Who's going to protect my rights? Who's going to protect your rights? So they were just chopping heads, chopping heads, chopping heads, chopping heads. 40,000 people in 1 year went to the guillotine, more or less. That's a rough number. 40,000 people dying, getting their heads chopped off at the guillotine, which is why they call it the Reign of Terror, this time period of hysteria, chaos, panic. And chaos is the word here. France was in an uproar. They didn't know what to do, what to say. People were dying. They were nervous of one another. And this new government wasn't working out so well. Things were not going as planned. And they decided maybe they even needed a brand new government. And they did try that. They tried that solution. So about a year later, after all this, you can write down your notes. In 1795, a 5-man council called the Directory was created to run the government in France. I'll read that again and you can write it down in your notes. In 1795, a 5-man council called the Directory was created to run the government in France. So they decided, you know what? Maybe a couple people, big shot leaders, isn't the best, because they had tried that with the Republic. They're like, you know what, we're going to set 5 people aside, call them the Directory, and their job is going to be to run the government. They're going to make sure that this doesn't happen again, that France is healed from especially this Reign of Terror type of idea. We're going to create this 5-man council. We're going to bring them in. They're going to run the government in France. The problem is, though, that really didn't help. The chaos still continued. Chaos continued. People ran rampant. France was really having a problem and really having an issue. And they didn't know what to do. They knew they needed a strong and powerful leader, but they didn't know how to go about that. For them, though, there was somebody watching on the sideline. Somebody was watching from a distance, keeping an eye on France, and was going to come in and attempt to help them. They were going to attempt to turn the ship around. And you've probably heard of this guy before. His name's Napoleon. Napoleon Bonaparte. You can write down in your notes, the French general Napoleon Bonaparte rose high in military ranks and returned to France when he heard it was having political troubles. I'll read that again. You can write it down. The French general Napoleon Bonaparte rose high in military ranks and returned to France when he heard it was having political troubles. So one of the French men, one of the French military generals of the time named Napoleon Bonaparte, he was out battling and fighting in different parts of Europe, and he heard that France was in trouble. They were having chaos. They were having political issues. So he decides to go back to France. He's rose high in the military ranks. He's got the rank of general, pretty high and popular in the military, and he rides back. He returns on home to France because he hears that it's in trouble. It's in political chaos and turmoil. And here's the man himself on his horse. I mean, look at that guy riding on the back. Got those eyes like he's ready, the hand pointed forward. He's ready to roll, ready to go. He speeds back to Europe from where he was fighting he was in Europe. He speeds back to France from where he was fighting, goes back to France, and people are pretty impressed. They generally liked Napoleon, so they believed that he was really going to help the situation. So I want you to write down, Napoleon comes in and he opposes the Directory. Napoleon opposed the Directory, took part in a coup d'etat, and took the title of First Consul. So I'll read that again for you. You can write it down. Napoleon opposed the Directory, took part in a coup d'etat, and took the title of First Consul. Napoleon comes in, doesn't like the Directory, this group of 5 people running the government, doesn't like them, wants them out, he opposes them. Then he takes part in a coup d'etat. If you don't know what a coup d'etat is, we'll get there in a moment. And he took the title of First Consul. So he takes a new title, takes a new government role for himself, and gives himself the power. What's a coup d'etat, you may ask? Well, I want you to write down in your notes that a coup d'etat is a change of government when a new group of leaders seizes power by force. I'll read that again, and you can write it down in your notes. A coup d'etat, a change of government when a new group of leaders seizes power by force. You may have just heard this called a coup when somebody says they're going to stage a coup. Same type of thing here, staging a coup. A coup d'etat is when a new leader or new leaders comes in, they take the power by force, they chase the original government and the government leaders out, and they take it for themselves. They take it, they claim it as their own, they start a new government in its place, they chase everybody out and start all over again, which is exactly what Napoleon did. He got rid of the Directory, got rid of that five guy, and now he takes the title, he takes over the government, and he's running France on his own. So he comes in, he sees the power he wants, he names it and claims it. He says, that power, this France, this territory, I want it. It's mine. I'm taking it now. And not only do I want France, I actually want much of Europe. I actually want as much of Europe as I can get, and even heading towards Russia. So he goes to do that. You can write down in your notes, and we'll get to talking about conquering Russia and Napoleon in just a moment, but you can write down your notes for now. Napoleon carried out some of the French Revolution's ideas and how he reorganized government using a new legal system known as the Napoleonic Codes. I'll read that for you again, and you can write it down. Napoleon carried out some of the French Revolution's ideas and how he reorganized government using a new legal system known as the Napoleonic Code. So he doesn't kick out all their ideas. He takes some of the ideas, reorganizes government, shakes it up, and brings this new legal system in. He calls the Napoleonic Code. He brings in this new code of law, keeping some of the French Revolution ideas, some of the heart of the time from the Enlightenment and earlier parts of the French Revolution, trying to keep the government organized. But Napoleon didn't really believe necessarily in the French ideas of revolution and the same type of government process, because he was just using that as a strong arm, a way to convince the people to follow him, to let him stay in power. He didn't necessarily believe in everything the revolution did, but he wanted the people to think he did because he wanted the power and he didn't want to lose control of France. So he used that as like flexing his muscle to impress the people. And you can write in your notes, beginning in 1803, Napoleon won a number of military battles that helped him build France into an empire that stretched across Europe. I'll read that again for you, and you can write it down. Beginning in 1803, Napoleon won a number of military battles that helped him build France into an empire that stretched across Europe. Maybe you never knew this, but France actually, at one time, stretched across Europe and owned a lot of territory in Europe, even headed up towards Russia and into parts of Russia. And that was because of Napoleon. He comes in and says, not only do I want France, I want as much of Europe as I can get, and even headed towards Russia. So starting in 1803, he starts working. He was already a military guy in general, and he starts battling. He starts working through Europe, conquering. He goes from having just France to building an empire that's going to stretch all across Europe, all through Europe, almost trying to rebuild the Roman Empire and match their size in a sense. So he's going through Europe, working through France. He starts in France, working through parts of Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, what we would call Poland, working all through France, spreading out, taking over territory in Europe, calling it French territory, and making it his own, making it territories and countries that are under Napoleon's power. And with all that, now it's an empire, so he's going to call himself an emperor. So you can write down your notes. In 1804, Napoleon crowned himself emperor, and France became an empire. I'll read it again for you. You can write it down. In 1804, Napoleon crowned himself emperor, and France became an empire. So Napoleon wants to be kind of like a king, a guy with absolute power. He's not really interested in republic or free government or necessarily ideas that we heard in some of the Revolution and the Enlightenment. He crowns himself emperor, gives himself ultimate authority and power, and France is his empire. It's his territory. He's the big dog on campus. He's the big man in charge. So he owns this territory. He owns France. He owns up through Europe and Germany, parts of Poland, headed towards Russia, all these different areas in Europe. I know this is a map of Europe just broken up in general, but he owns more than just France. He owns a good portion of Europe, which is the major part of the world at this point in time. And that would work well. Napoleon had his empire. Everything seemed well. He owned a lot of places, a lot of people, a lot of territory, till the other territories said, you know what? No. We don't agree. No. You can write down your notes that the nations conquered by Napoleon rejected his rule and responded with nationalism, meaning they wanted to rule themselves, which ended the French Empire. I'll say it again. You can write it down in your notes. The nations conquered by Napoleon rejected his rule and responded with nationalism, meaning they wanted to rule themselves, which ended the French Empire. Napoleon conquered all these nations, all his territory, but they said, nope, we don't want your rules. We don't want your power. We don't want you as our emperor. As a matter of fact, get out. We want nationalism. We want to rule ourselves, kind of like they had been on their own, or maybe they hadn't. Maybe they had other rulers, but now they wanted freedom. They said, you know what? We want to rule ourselves. We don't want you. We want to be independent. We want to do our own thing. That's what they wanted. And so, as quickly as it began, it was over. That ended the French Empire. Those territories broke apart. Kicked Napoleon out. They didn't want him. They rejected him. It ended the French Empire pretty quickly. And Napoleon was shamed. He was put into shame. He had not done what he wanted to do. He hadn't really helped France. He had kind of put France deeper in a hole because he had been fighting wars, battles, even, racking up bills and debt for them, spreading their troops out. He hadn't really done that much because now he's lost his empire, what he wanted, and he was really no longer the emperor he wanted to be. So he was ashamed. And with that, he was thrown into exile. He was kicked out of France. He was sent to be on his own. So you can write down your notes. Napoleon was exiled twice. The second time he went to prison where he died in 1821. I'll read that again for you. You can write it down. Napoleon was exiled twice. The second time he went to prison where he died in 1821. So he's kicked out twice. Sent to live on his own by himself. He's exiled twice. One time he does come back and get the old group, the old band and army back together to take over, but pretty quickly they stomp him out again. And the second time they send him out to prison, and he ends up dying there in 1821. So he loses his empire. He's not emperor for long, not even a full lifetime. In a whole lifetime, he had fought under different governments in France, came back, taken over the government, ruled France, built a small empire of France, getting parts of Europe and headed towards Russia, and then lost that all, been exiled twice, and even put in prison where he eventually died in 1821. So our buddy France, we've been talking a lot about France today. We had been talking about France. Now you got to wonder, during this French Revolution, what happened to France? I mean, all this has happened, and we did a very quickly overview. We didn't dive into it near as much as you could. There's so much you could learn and talk about. So what happens to France after this? What happens? Do they ever get what they want? Do they ever get the government? Do they ever get things sorted out and out of all this chaos and madness? Well, you can write down in your notes that in 1814, at the Congress of Vienna, European leaders established goals to return peace and stability to Europe. I'll read that again for you, and you can write it down. In 1814, at the Congress of Vienna, European leaders established goals to return peace and stability to Europe. So 1814, all these European countries come together, and they say, you know what? We're going to establish ourselves goals, outcomes to return peace and stability to Europe. They say things have been kind of crazy. I mean, there was the medieval times, the Middle Ages, which is the same thing, Renaissance, Reformation, all kinds of wars, ages of exploration, trade, Enlightenment, scientific revolution, the American Revolution for Britain. Now this French Revolution, they say, you know what? Let's just call it a time. Let's establish goals of peace, stability. Let's get ourselves back on track here in Europe and come together and really work and strive for peace and stability. And that's where our story of Europe ends for the year. We've been through all kinds of crazy times in Europe, a couple other countries as well, but we've spent a lot of time in Europe, again, from the Middle Ages or medieval times to the Renaissance, the Reformation, age of exploration and trade, scientific revolution, Enlightenment, even talking about the American Revolution, which definitely affected Europe, and now talking about the French Revolution, where they decide after that they're going to try and return to peace and stability, get themselves back on track. So back to our guiding questions. Why did revolution break out in France, and what was the aftermath of the revolution? Well, revolution broke out in France similar to the American Revolution. They wanted fair representation. They wanted to be equal in government. They didn't want to be taxed without representation. They wanted freedom. They didn't end up writing a constitution until early on, though, which America wrote it after the fact. France and the French people wrote it early on because they were ready to fight and ready for change. And the aftermath was a lot of chaos, a reign of terror, chaos. Napoleon came in and took the power. He became emperor. and for a while he had an empire in France. But there was a lot of craziness before the Revolution, during the Revolution, and after the French Revolution. A lot of craziness, a lot of madness, a lot of things going on. Kind of makes your head spin. And this was just a quick overview. There's so much you could talk about and study about when it comes to France and the French Revolution time period. So I want to talk briefly about some housekeeping things with you, so make sure you stay with me for just a few minutes as we wrap things up and I tell you what's next for the day and for the rest of the time we have this year. So you do have an assignment on LMS. Make sure you do that. It's the French Revolution Essentials. Going to do some reading to give you some more insight, some more depth than we got into in the video. Do the reading, answer the questions. You know how essential sheets work. So that assignment is up on LMS for you, and it's due Monday night at 11:30 p.m. This Monday night, 11:30 p.m. It's Monday, May 18th. So that's up there for you. Also, make sure you turn your French Revolution notes, all the notes you took from this video, turn them in on on LMS. That's also due Monday, May 18th. You shouldn't have to do anything extra for that. If you watched the whole video, you followed along, you took the notes, you're just turning in the notes you took from the French Revolution video today on May 18th. You're turning those in on LMS. You're getting grades and points for them. So pretty easy peasy. Essentials up on LMS. Turn your notes in on LMS as well. A couple last things I'm going to talk about. This coming Thursday, you will have a quiz on the French Revolution and the American Revolution. It'll be an American Revolution and French Revolution quiz. It'll be the last quiz you take with me for World Study 7. You'll have that quiz on Thursday. Also on Thursday, what else is going to happen? Well, you're going to get introduced to your final project for the year. You will have one more thing you do for me after the quiz for the class. You'll take your quiz on Thursday. It's only open on Thursday. It's not going to be open any other day. Quizzes are only open for a day. So take the quiz on Thursday, American Revolution, French Revolution. After that, make sure you check and do the reading and watch the video explaining what I want you to do for your final project. You'll have one more final project. I'll explain what it is on Thursday. You'll get some insight and you'll get to hear about that, what you're going to do to finally finish out your year with me for World Study 7. Awesome, guys. Well, I'm going to pray to close us out. Then we're going to call it a day. So let's go ahead and a word of prayer. Father God, I thank you for each and every one of these students. Be with them. Give them your grace, strength, and perseverance as they finish out the school year strong. Lord, I know we're all ready for a time period of rest. Just again, help us to finish strong in the finish line. Continue to remember what we've studied and prepared hard with, Lord. We just ask that you fill us with your Holy Spirit for your use and purposes today. Grow us in the image of your Son, Lord, in Christ's likeness and sanctification, making us more like Jesus in the way that we love and the way that we live. We thank you for this day, Lord, and all the ways that you're working. We love you. We praise you. We give you the honor, the glory, the praise, and we pray all these things in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to do the essentials and turn your notes in on LMS for the French Revolution. There will be a quiz on Thursday for the American Revolution and the French Revolution, and I'll also talk about your final project on Thursday, and you'll start working on that. So make sure to check out for that on Thursday, the quiz, final project. Today, Monday, May 18th, you have an essentials and notes for French Revolution to upload. That's on LMS for you. I'll let you get to it. Thanks for watching. Keep up the great work. You're almost there. I'm proud of you. I'm praying for all of you, and I'll talk to you all soon.